You can visit our website address, financialargument.net. And
The financial and political opinions expressed in this video are not necessarily of Financial Argument or its staff. Opinions expressed in this video do not constitute personalized investment advice and should not be relied on for making investment decisions.
Now, the central banks, they've been in power for too long. And there is now a move to bring down the central bank system. We're on the cusp of a financial war, and this is a war with the central bank system. We've done this before. We fought the central bank twice before, and we won both times, and we will win this time. We'll be talking about that in just a bit. But first, when we start to look at the economy, we understand that the housing market is imploding on itself. I know the interest rates, they have been kept the same, and Trump is calling for the interest rates to be lowered, to have stimulus reintroduced to try to keep the economic system going into the 2020 election and maybe a little bit after that. He knows that this economy can only last for a certain period of time. And when we look at Wells Fargo, we see that their entire mortgage origination, it has been declining since right after the economic crisis of 2008, 2009. And around 2012, everything started to fall apart for them. And what we're seeing right now is that in the first quarter of 2019, the originations shrink again, dropping to just $33 billion, down $5 billion sequentially, and the lowest level since the financial crisis. Putting this number in context, just 6 years ago, when the U.S. housing market was actually solid, Wells was originating 4 times as many mortgages, or about $120 billion worth. You can see that the system has been deteriorating for quite a while. It's not because of Trump, it's not because of the tariffs, it's not because of any of this. It has to do with the central bank system that we're in. They knew back in 2008 that this system couldn't go any further. Why do you think they had to have this crisis in 2008? They did it on purpose so they can introduce stimulus, so they can do things they normally wouldn't be able to do. They had to put fear in the people, in the governments around the world to say, listen, if you don't do something, the whole thing's coming down. And the fear worked. They allowed the central banks to do whatever they wanted to do. And the central banks knew they were going to have to create as much currency as possible and take this currency and give it to certain corporations and to other central banks and to other countries to keep the system alive. Because if they didn't do this, their system, and I'm talking about their system, would fall apart. They'd be exposed. Everyone would know what happened. So they took this opportunity to make a last-ditch effort to move their system someplace else and to make huge profits in the process. And that's what they've been doing. And we know that the system is slowing. The IMF has been continually out there telling us that it's slowing. And it's because of the tariffs, which is false. Because if you go back in time and you look at the IMF and what they've been recording, you can see they make great projections, but their GDP projections continually declined from 2008 to the present day. The world economy never did what they said it was going to do. Instead, the opposite was happening. But now they're trying to make the case that it's because of the tariffs, which is fake, phony, and false. They're also out there saying that the global growth is slowing. In many countries, they're struggling with high debts. Well, why are they struggling with high debts? Because the system is based on debt. And the only way for countries to survive is to take on more debt. And if they don't have tax receipts coming in, if people don't have jobs, how do you pay for this debt? You can't. So they have to borrow more, which puts them into further debt. The central bank system does not help a country, it does not help a people. And of course, Christine Lagarde is out there saying this is not the time for the self-inflicted economic wound of trade wars. Well, what happens once the trade deals are agreed upon? What happens when the tariffs are removed? What is the IMF going to blame all this on? Well, remember going back in time, the mainstream media, the central banks, they were blaming the downfall of retail on the weather. Then they blamed it on online sales. Now they're blaming it on tariffs and trade. Well, we're very close to a trade deal. And when this happens, and all of a sudden the tariffs are removed, they're going to be out in the open, and they'll have nothing to blame this on. Now, we know that Trump, he is making the move to restructure the Fed. He has two individuals, Herman Cain, Stephen Moore. You might not like them. It doesn't matter. Because there's a reason why he's nominating these individuals. Because he wants the infighting to start. And it's not ridiculous for Trump to consider nominating Herman Cain to the U.S. Federal Reserve Board. Cain has relevant experience and good ideas. Of course, the deep state and the mainstream media is out there, and they're saying, and this is coming from the Washington Post, calls Cain's potential nomination a reckless move. Now, the criticism of Cain can be summarized into three main points. Herman Cain doesn't understand economics. Catherine Rampell, a columnist for the Washington Post, wrote last week, 999. That should be the Senate response if President Trump actually nominates his friend Herman Cain. While she acknowledges that Trump past Fed nominees are competent, well-qualified professionals, according to what standard, I don't know, that they're academics and that they fit into the mold, maybe that's what she's going on. But we know that Cain is neither an economist nor a banker, and these are the two professions that traditionally have dominated the Federal Reserve. Cain does not fit into this. But Cain's life is a quintessential American economic success story. He's a native of Atlanta, Georgia. Cain was born into a poor family. His mother worked as a maid, and his father was once a chauffeur. From his humble background, Cain went to college, got a master's degree in computer science from Purdue University, and worked his way up from analyst to chief executive in corporate America. One of his business accomplishments was the turnaround of the Godfather's pizza chain in 14 months when he was its president and CEO. But there's more. In 1992, Cain became one of the board of directors of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City and was the board's chairman from 95 to 96. And, of course, he supports what? The gold standard. And right now, they're saying the gold standard is absolutely ridiculous. It's a ridiculous idea because many Americans are not familiar with the gold standard today. So it is easier for political pundits and even some economists to dismiss the gold standard as a fringe idea. But in 1800s, almost all the nations in the world adopted the gold standard, which guaranteed that the government would redeem any amount of paper money for its value in gold. The beauty of the gold standard is that because there is a limited supply of gold, it serves as a natural constraint on government spending and inflation. The gold standard forces the U.S. to live within its means. Now, the United States was on the gold standard for 179 years until August 15, 1971, when President Nixon ordered the Fed not to redeem U.S. dollars with gold, essentially ending the gold standard in the United States. Listen to Nixon in what he said back then.
The third indispensable element in building the new prosperity is closely related to creating new jobs and halting inflation. We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In the past 7 years, there's been an average of one international monetary crisis every year. Now, who gains from these crises? Not the working man, not the investor, not the real producers of wealth. The gainers are the international money speculators. Because they thrive on crises, they help to create them. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what is this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar. Now, this action will not win us any friends among the international money traders. But our primary concern is with the American workers and with fair competition around the world. To our friends abroad, including the many responsible members of the international banking community who are dedicated to stability and the flow of trade, I give this assurance. The United States has always been and will continue to be a forward-looking and trustworthy trading partner. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system. Stability and equal treatment is in everybody's best interest. I am determined that the American dollar must never again be a hostage in the hands of international speculators. I'm taking one further step to protect the dollar, to improve our balance of payments, and to increase jobs for Americans. As a temporary measure, I am today imposing an additional tax of 10% on goods imported into the United States. This is a better solution for international trade than direct controls on the amount of imports. This import tax is a temporary action. It isn't directed against any other country. It's an action to make certain that American products will not be at a disadvantage because of unfair exchange rates. When the unfair treatment is ended, the import tax will end as well. As a result of these actions, the product of American labor will be more competitive, and the unfair edge that some of our foreign competition has will be removed. This is a major reason why our trade balance has eroded over the past 15 years.
Now, yes, today, the people don't understand gold. Many people don't understand gold. So we're going to have to reintroduce this once again. Remember, the plan of the Federal Reserve, the plan of the central banks from 1913 on was to remove the idea that gold is sound money and brainwash the people into thinking that their paper currency was the only way to go, the only type of currency to be used as trade. And we know that this is not true. Keynes is an unapologetic and outspoken conservative. When he was the leader of the National Restaurants Association, he criticized Hillary Clinton's healthcare nationalization plan. He frequently disagreed with former President Obama. One of his well-known criticisms was, hope and change is not a solution. Hope and change is not a job. So the argument the deep state is making, the argument that the mainstream media is making, is that Keynes and Moore cannot become federal board members. They would ruin the independence of the Fed because they are both Trump loyalists and would politicize future monetary decisions. But the point of having these individuals in the Federal Reserve is not to keep the Federal Reserve the way it is. It's to destroy the Federal Reserve. And if it's not them, it will be somebody else. And you can see that the mainstream media and the deep state and the central banks, they're trying to push off and keep these type of individuals out of the system. But it's not going to work. Now, very interestingly, The Economist is coming out, and their article that they put out says the independence of central banks is under threat from politics. And you can see that they're getting worried and nervous that the central bank's independence is going to be taken away, which means they're going to be controlled. And they're very worried about this. Now, Trump's coming war with the Fed has just begun. Like Andrew Jackson before him, Trump is preparing to go to war with America's central bank. Remember, Trump installed a portrait of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office. It's right behind his desk. Andrew Jackson fought a bitter battle with his cabinet, fired 2 Treasury secretaries, mounted a campaign against the Bank of the United States. Nicholas Biddle, president of the Bank of the United States, resisted Jackson, and the bank war followed. Biddle was allied with Henry Clay, and when Jackson beat Clay in the 1832 election, he took it as a mandate to get rid of the bank, which he eventually succeeded in doing. The nation remained without a central bank from 1836 until Woodrow Wilson established the Federal Reserve System on December 22, 1913. And remember, this is the third central bank that we had in this country. These central bankers continually try to infiltrate the United States. They're kicked out, and they try again. Serious observers and policymakers believe that Trump's war on the Fed is designed to set the tone for a full assault after the 2020 election. I do believe this, that after the 2020 election, this is when he's going to go full out on the central bank system. They believe he knows that neither Moore nor Kane can be confirmed, but he wants to set up a battle that will arouse his base against the Fed. Trump is setting the stage and the narrative to get rid of the Fed. And he introduces this narrative very, very slowly. In the beginning, it was tweeting out and contradicting the Fed. Contradicting the Fed a little bit more. Telling the Fed, don't raise the rates. When the Fed didn't raise the rates, Trump said, you know something, maybe we should lower the rates. Trump blamed the Fed when they raised the rates, that it hurt the stock market. And this is going to continue on. We are seeing the third war against the central bank. It is happening in real time right in front of us. That's why Trump took Andrew Jackson, hung the portrait in his office. It was on purpose. It was a message to the central bankers, letting them know we are coming after you. And nothing, and I mean nothing, will stop it. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe.